Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right.
She gets real sassy about the recording. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that, but yeah, she wants to make sure there are no questions about whether or not things are being recorded. So can you see my screen? Or do you still see Lyman's? There we go.
I just stopped sharing, so that probably helps a lot.
Yeah, I would guess. Now can you see it?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks, Olivia. I'm just gonna, can you just leave the thumbs up all the time? Because it will just help me feel supported in general. So we're here to talk about conscious capitalism and culture within the current context. It's a lot of C's in one sentence, but first of all, I want to thank Kelly, Lisa, Bob for letting me join, and Rachel join. Lyman, thank you for stepping in at the last minute. I didn't realize we were gonna have a quick intro, so I will skip that and get right into the topic we want to discuss with you guys, which is about creating culture during this what seems to be never-ending crisis that we've been in over the last 2 years, and how to think about creating culture within your organizations and in a way that reflects the conscious capitalism philosophies and leans into human-centric solutions. And so we're going to talk about that in detail, because also Smokey Bones is doing a lot of great work that I thought people would be interested to learn about. So this is the thing I have been hearing the last couple of years is that, oh, this is going to be over soon. For 2 years, we've spent time hoping that this would be over and holding on to the past. And just these icons to walk you through them. The one on the left, that shows the virus and its various variants. You can see where we are right now with Omicron. When we hear someone is unwell, the emotional experience we have is pretty strong because we're worried for that person. That is something that continues to be the case, right? A year ago, we were hoping this would be over by spring, and it just doesn't seem to be going away. The other thing is that this virus has a long tail. So that pie chart in the middle represents, on the left-hand side, the percentage of people who have had to put off medical procedures or medical care, medical tests, and that puts them at long-term risk health-wise, and will have a long-term impact on the cost of healthcare, but also the health and well-being of our employees. And then, of course, the one on the right is the one that's the most kind of disturbing, which is that top bar. That top bar is that the deaths from COVID. COVID deaths have been the highest cause of death for 2 years running. And that doesn't seem to be stopping. With that, we are a nation in mourning. We have experienced loss. We have experienced trauma. And so to say, oh, well, as soon as we get the virus gone, everything will be behind us is a little bit of a naive point of view. The other thing is let's just say that we erase the virus entirely. It ain't the only thing going on in the world right now. One, people are dealing with the existential crisis of climate change and the experience. If everybody could be on mute, that would be helpful. Thank you. That experience has, I mean, Rachel's in Texas. A year ago, people were dying from the freeze because the system couldn't support the demands that were on it. That was very traumatic for people. And we've had all kinds of issues this year as a result of climate change. We have the Great Resignation. You can call it whatever you want, but 4.5 million people left their jobs in November, quit. And so that's not people being fired. That's not layoffs. That's people saying, I can't do this anymore. That is, these are historical numbers. And of course, the impact that has on our businesses is enormous. It opens up and puts extra weight on the people who are still there as far as the workload goes. And then you have people who are going to be starting new jobs, a big influx of new people. That is a burden as well. We have social unrest. Think about this. A year ago, the Confederate flag was in our nation's capital. Never happened before. We are in a time of crisis when it comes to the politics of our nation. We are also forced to be distanced from each other. Look at this screen. Our tribal brains evolved for us to have social connection. That strain, it damages our psyche and our emotional load. Supply chain demands, which you think, okay, what does that have to do with creating culture? Well, it puts stress on the system when we don't have the products we need, we don't have the supplies that we need. And then of course, inflation. We had the highest increase in inflation since 1982 at 7% last year. Most companies budget cost of living increases at 3%. So we have employees who are making less money this year than they made last year. So none of these, yes, they're part of the virus, but the virus is not the only thing going on. So alignment, don't worry, I've got like ways we can handle it later. I'm just kind of telling you why it's important. So Lyman introduced us. My name is Dr. Allessandria Polizzi. I have 20 years of experience in leading talent, organizational development, and leadership development. I also have been the head of HR for large national organizations. And I'm excited to be joined today by Rachael. Rachael, can you introduce yourself to the group real quickly?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachael Kelly, the Chief People and Culture Officer for Smokey Bones. We also have two virtual brands, the Wing Experience and the Burger Experience. And I have over 20 years in the restaurant industry, in operations and in human resources. So happy to be here. Thank you.
And as I mentioned, Rachael is joining us from Texas. And so that's a little bit about us. We've been working together on this project for Smokey Bones, but I think it really is reflective of a larger approach that we have within the conscious capitalism philosophies. To me, it falls into two buckets. One is culture, the other is leadership. And it's the culmination of how we equip leaders to create that culture so that we can create the vibrant organizations that thrive. So as we think about conscious culture, it falls into these buckets. We've got trust, building authenticity, showing our caring for our employees, demonstrating transparency, demonstrating integrity, creating a learning or growth mindset within our organizations, and empowering our employees. So as we think about those things, I have my first question for Rachael, which is, how do you know if your culture is where it needs to be?
I think about that quite a bit. Probably it's a daily conversation and thought process that happens. And I think, first, culture is probably never where we fully want it to be. It's a continuous process. It's continuously growing, changing. Every day it's changing as people come and go from the organization. So there's a lot of things that we look at, both qualitatively and quantitatively. And there's a lot of data points, right? Turnover is a data point. When are people leaving? How are they interacting with the organization? What are the reasons that they're leaving? We look at how the company is performing. Are we meeting our purpose and achieving what our objectives are? I mean, at the end of the day, the things that we do and facilitate are to accomplish those goals. And so it's indicative of a cultural issue if we're not. We look at how people are behaving, how not only, how are we behaving around the wins and are we accomplishing the wins, but how are we behaving around the losses? And how are people behaving with each other around that? Are we taking those as learning opportunities, or are we looking for whose throat to cut? Those are two very different cultures. And so, when people are under stress and pressure, you see kind of what happens when they're in that lizard brain. And so those are a lot of the things. We look at what the behaviors are in terms of people's interactions during meetings, during sessions, what people are saying about the brand internally and externally. Those are all indicators of how the culture is how the culture is doing and if it's going in the right direction.
Thanks for sharing that, Rachel. I want to hit on something that you mentioned, which is, that limbic system, being in that stress response. So the reason why I started our conversation talking about all of the external factors that are impacting our employees and our teams is because we can't take the human out of their life. People don't shut off and turn on when they walk through your doors. They are whole people and they bring that with them. And so if I have constant stress or constant change, that decreases my ability to flex and adapt at work. And so if I'm experiencing a stress response, I may or may not have the skills to be able to navigate that in a way that is resilient, and that's why organizations like mine teach those resiliency leadership skills, because that's the skills that we quite frankly haven't historically taught. And I can say that as someone who's been in this space for 20 years, but it is definitely a skill that we need as we move into the future, especially at this historical moment. But thank you for bringing that up. That gave me a great opportunity to talk about that. Thank you, Rachel. We didn't plan that one. All right, so let's go back to these and talk about how our cultures have been impacted through the last 2 years within this context. So let's talk first about trust. During the initial chaos of the pandemic, a lot was swirling and moving around. That, in many cases, could undermine trust, right? We had layoffs, we had work freezes. People just didn't know what to do or where to go to find information, and that can undermine trust. The second thing that can undermine trust is the fact that we don't get to be together, and we build those bonds organically as we've evolved over 200,000 years. It's been in tribal communities. It hasn't been isolated in rooms talking to people through screens. And so that wears away at the trust factor within our organizations. And it's something that we need to really consider. The second one is authenticity. So think about the last 2 years when it comes to the political unrest I talked about earlier. If I'm someone who has experienced trauma through bias in my life, be it racism, sexism, other traumas, those conflicts have made, in many cases, people feel less able to be their authentic selves. They want to protect themselves, and so they go into that response by pulling back. So those old wounds can come up outside of work, and then they're brought into work. Secondly, again, how we've evolved is to be able to read people's faces. When most of your face is covered up, it is really hard to know what the other person is thinking and doing. Authenticity can't just come from here. So that hinders our ability to show authenticity. Caring. I did a podcast actually on this topic a few months ago. We've actually, through COVID, uncovered additional schemas that impact the psyche of essential workers. One of them is their response when they see the public deny that there is a problem and not protect themselves with masks or get vaccinated, because who's left holding the bag? The healthcare workers. And so the ability to show that we care about you as a healthcare worker has had a tremendous emotional and psychological impact on essential workers. There's that. Secondly, we've seen social norms of common courtesy go out the window. We had this happen in Cape Cod. I don't know if you guys remember, a restaurant had to shut down because of all the abuses that the staff was receiving from the customers. 68% of essential workers have been threatened on the job. The restaurant industry experiences this pretty heavily, and I'm sure Rachel can talk about that. Transparency. When the leaders don't necessarily have answers for everyone, it can feel like they're holding back, and it can make that very confusing for the front lines. one thing is, that's a really good example, is our return to work plans, which have gone back and forth and back and forth, and people just don't know how to plan. And sometimes they feel, justly or not, that somebody has the answer and they're just not telling us. Again, that trust eroding doesn't help. Leading with integrity, we've seen some of those things put into question with behaviors, the way our politicians have spoken the truth or not spoken the truth. There's a lot of distrust. Learning, how hard is it to keep our hands on, or our arms around the latest, what's coming out on how to stay safe, what the rules are for staying safe, vaccination requirements, everything is changing. This really hits your HR teams pretty heavily because they have to constantly be up to speed. They spent all of this time at the end of the year making sure they had vaccines, if they had over 100 employees, and then boom, that just went away yesterday. So it's just hard to keep up. And when you're exhausted, by the way, learning goes out the window. And then empowerment. Empowering our teams to make decisions for themselves. We definitely were empowered when we all went to work from home. But some companies, probably none on this call, are doing mandated return to offices, again, because we're stuck trying to hold on to the past and recreate what we had. And so when we do that, we hinder people's ability to manage their schedules. When we hinder people's ability to manage their schedules, we actually decrease their emotional well-being by upwards of 30 to 40%. So people have felt, granted, there's been, downside, but they felt empowered to manage their own schedules, which can be hugely influential in whether or not you develop burnout. So all of these parts to our cultures have been threatened and negatively impacted over the last couple of years. But I want to talk to Rachael and get your point of view. What are some things that you've seen over the last 2 years that's impacted you at Smokey Bones?
Yeah. Well, I would agree with everything that you said first, because all of those things had an acute impact on our restaurants being, in 16 states and in urban areas and more rural areas. So we experienced all of those pressures and stressors. I think for us also the speed of change, the need for just incredible agility, and the need to fail fast was just huge, and be able to continuously adjust, refine, just the agility of the organization, of individuals, emotional agility, those things. We had to turn our business model on its head overnight. And to your point, people didn't have all the answers, and we didn't have all of the answers. And we talked about that actually very open and vulnerably about the fact that we didn't, and we would talk about things as they developed. That communication was really important. It was.
Oh, make sure we have it. Make sure we have it muted.
And so like that was hugely important. It helped us with our agility, because that is the biggest thing, being able to move, being able to execute a different model, be able to help other people be agile and execute change very fast, has been just an essential part of, us navigating through.
Just not to digress too much, but can you talk a little bit about the models that you mentioned virtual restaurants. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 62 locations, and then out of those locations, we operate our traditional Smokey Bones restaurant, which is a full service bar restaurant. We have multiple kind of business segments, both in our restaurant and a very heavy third party. And then we also operate out of those restaurants the wing experience, which is, we have some pretty great wings, and 50 different flavors, combinations and options. And then people even like our wing tenders, like make some other things. So there's a great deal of complexity that we've actually put into our restaurants between packaging, between different menu items, because we have the wing experience, which is its own brand, its own marketing, its own menu with Smokey Bones items, but prepared differently. And then we have the burger experience, which is the same thing, also a different concept, a little bit more retro style. The crinkle fries, ridiculously good Parmesan truffle, but so lots of so it creates complexity, and the flipping of the model and going all of a sudden having restaurants where we were only doing curbside, and we're doing crazy third party and off premise business during that time. I mean, it changed everything about what we do, how we manage our processes, how we navigate. I mean, so there's just a lot of a lot of moving parts there. But so anyway, I think that those brands create just an additional wonderful layer of business for Smokey Bones, and we're continuing to grow those and expect that that'll continue to be a successful part of our business. So we're kind of running 3 out of 1 location.
Which is talk about, creating culture, right? When you have 3 brands in 1 location, it's an interesting conundrum. But one of the things I want to share with the group is that despite the challenges, organizations like yours have really used this as an opportunity to galvanize your culture. And that's why I'm so excited to have you join. And I've so much enjoyed working with you because of how forward thinking your organization has been. In fact, you guys have won a Great Place to Work the last 2 years in a row with, what is it? 80% of employees saying it's a great place to work, as opposed to the 59% norm. And some other remarkable scores like 87% of new hires feeling welcome and 86% of employees feeling they can be themselves, which I think is a really important part of your brand. And then I have to brag on you. And you also were just selected as Woman of the Year by the Southern Florida Diversity Council. So you guys are doing great things in a chaotic world. How have you been able to create that culture?
Yeah. I think it really started with, it starts with what we call human-centric leadership from the executive team. You can't fake that. You can't pretend to be something different, and have different values than you do. It comes out and people can figure that out. And the leadership team, we were a newer leadership team. We had I think we had like 6 months together. And there was a very, challenging culture, I would say, going into it. It was actually one of the things that I was tasked with transforming. And so it really just starts with the leadership team understanding and thinking about human beings at every step of the way. As a business grows, as a business evolves, that we're thinking about the human, that's part of the considerations, set, right? That it's part of the implications of the decision. What is that going to mean for human beings? And when those leaders think about that, and that's in our wiring of how we function, then the decisions that we make are shaped with that kind of thinking. And then we are also thinking about how are we going to communicate and engage and help people understand and take people on this journey with us, because we all needed to get through this journey together. And so, when things first went down, the leadership team rallying around that concept, we didn't even actually have words at that point. We hadn't defined human-centric yet, leadership yet, but we understood that we had our guests, we had our employees, our team, and we had our shareholders. And it was those 3 stakeholder groups that we needed to wrap around and take on this journey to survival. And we rallied around, okay, we are going to, not only are we going to navigate through this and survive, we're going to navigate through this and we're going to come out thriving. We're going to come out kicking. We're going to come out on top. And we kind of galvanized around this kind of idea and this concept of like making it happen, right? And we talked about 3 key values at that point at the beginning around doing things with integrity, being creative. That's one of our values is we find, new ways to solve old problems, old challenges, and with resiliency. that we were going to be resilient, like in talking about that and then teaching that. But it all started with, I think it really started with the leadership team being open, transparent, sharing and being vulnerable, available, and thinking about and understanding in all those decisions that we are making as things were happening about the human being involved and how we could wrap our arms around them through it.
So Rachel, I wanted to jump in here with a quick question.
All right.
Some of what you talked about is how things seem to kind of get accelerated during the COVID period that we've been in. But I'm wondering, like, was that all in place before COVID, like with the management team, or was there something that was earlier on that kind of precipitated this decision to really make culture, a very high importance element of the experience, with it, when you decided to go to work at Smokey Bones,
Yeah, that's a great question. The culture was not there at the start of this at all. The level of importance of transforming, James called it at that time a cultural renaissance. The level of importance was important. That it was part of our strategic plan, still is part of our strategic plan to build a winning culture and be a best place to work. And so, but we were a newly formed leadership team, that came in to do certain, there's a reason we formed a new team, came in to do certain things, and we'd only been working together 6 months. So we had some conversation of values, but really the COVID it's like when in crisis, you learn who you are and you learn who people are, and you're faced with that moment of like, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to be? And who do we want to be? It was a defining moment for us so the event was really COVID and needing to survive and deciding how we were going to do that. That it wasn't just about survival. It was about surviving in a way that we all felt good about and that we all could sleep at night and that would accomplish our ultimate goals, which is to grow our business and all be successful. So
If I
great,
can add,
thanks.
Thanks for the question, Lyman. If I can add to that too, what I observe is that you can think of HR in your business in one of two ways. You can see it as the tactics that make sure that people get paid and they got benefits and make sure we don't get in trouble. You can see it, and you need those things, sure. Or you can see it as a strategic part of managing talent and your strategy for your organization. And in that, you'll make hiring decisions of who do I want in that top seat. I can tell you when you have someone like Rachael Kelly, you're going to get this and it's going to be on fire. So, but as an organization, you have to decide like, who are we and how important is that role going to be as part of the alchemy that makes our organization unique and special. So a couple of other questions, and again, not to give too much away about what you and I are up to, but what I've noticed as we've worked together, some things I'd like to share with the broader group for you guys to consider is, okay, all of these things are happening, right? How do I, like Smokey Bones has done and other organizations have done, use this as an opportunity to, leap forward? You talked about resiliency being part of your culture and part of your values. Resiliency by definition is the ability to bounce back, right? And so my friend who is the head of crisis leadership at Harvard, actually we're presenting tomorrow on psychological safety, Eric McNulty, says, don't just bounce back, bounce forward. So how do you bounce forward when you're faced with challenge? So one of the things that I noticed, and I always go to as well, is have it be employee led. You don't have to have all the answers as the executive team, nor should you. They say that Most executive teams are absolutely clueless when it comes to what the opinions of the front line are. And most surveys will show, here's the executive team and how we're doing. Here's the front lines. I literally had this conversation with someone an hour ago. So get the people who do the work involved. So I know that that's something that you guys did with the language and the passion and the energy and purpose and how you guys articulated your values. How did that get started, and kind of talk the group through that?
Yeah. Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, we started these weekly town halls, which are on camera, executive team and all our management team. We did a couple of those with our frontline team members, and we started an internal social media channel. And so one of the things that we observed was there were certain people that stood out, and that, you know, as we were going through things, people stood out as championing other people, sharing helpful information, encouraging people, helping to solve problems, kind of being part of the solution. And the social media channel, the internal social media channel, is very, very effective in that the executives and the RSC leaders, the office folks, right, who normally you have this like office team, and then you have this field, and there's this like contentious, you know, dynamic tension there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're immediately the end users of their products, promotions, decisions, what, you know, things they sent, immediately they're getting feedback when it's good and when it's bad, right? And what we figured out very quickly was when we responded to that in a way that was like, oh, this is great. Oh my gosh. Wow, this is great information. We acted on it and responded and got better and better and better. People saw that and they were more apt to participate. And so from all of that came a group of people that we call brand ambassadors. And really at that time, they were brand ambassador leaders. And these were field leaders, frontline employees, some of them, and that were just passionate about the brand. And so we pulled them together and we said, hey, look, I said, I don't know, you know, I've not ever done anything like this. I've been wanting to do this for years, but I'd love to have this group. I'd love to bring you together, get your opinion on a bunch of stuff, run things past you, be able to get real feedback. And you could tell me I'm a POS if you think, you know, or whatever, you know. And we had those conversations about tough things, like how do we celebrate Black History Month and not like put our foot in our mouth, right? And do it right and do it effectively, things like that. People, they started to participate. And then, so as we started to craft out the language of our values, to circle back to your question, we had these just amazing brand ambassadors that were real, understood, they were living and breathing it. And so they helped us write it. And then they were part of writing what we call our human-manifesto, which are, you know, our statements around our values, right? And the ways that we bring them to life. And they wrote those. And in fact, some of those things on the human-manifesto were actually real things, like we're the kind of people that'll dress up in a pig suit and dance for sales, you know? Yes, because we're goofy and we'll, you know, have fun and be creative, or we'll paint our nails with flames. You know, now we actually have people doing flames tattoos, our brand Flame as a tattoo. So, you know, we let those folks, they did so much better job than, you know, stuffy Rachel would have done in writing that stuff. So the product is just so much better. The work product is so much better. And then it's real, and there's pride there, and there's pride of authorship. So then that same group helps to, you know, evangelizes that in the organization and really drives it. So that's how we fostered and did that.
Now, are they the fire starters?
Well, everyone technically is a fire starter. We're all fire starters, but yes, some of the folks, it's a blend. And so we actually, people at the beginning, they're like, wait, who can do this? And and you have to be approved. And I'm like, no, just like, you can be a dishwasher, you can be a GM, you could be a marketing person. Like, you know, I want us all together, all levels of the organization represented. So it was a really, it was a fun and proved out to be a successful experiment. for sure.
Well, speaking of values, so the other thing is that you have these very clearly defined values, and they aren't something that sits on the wall. It's definitely something that that lives and breathes within your organization. So, and you and I spent some time connecting them to your competencies as well. So now that's how leaders are evaluated. It's part of your performance reviews. So can you share a little bit more with the group about that process and why you've made the values part of so much within the people strategy?
Yeah. It's part of our brand strategy. I mean, a key part of our brand strategy is around culture, and those values, we put language to what we were doing. You know what I mean? Like, it's not about people going, oh, we should be this, and so let's put it on a poster and push out this program and, blah, blah, blah. It has to be authentic and an actual reflection of the actual values of the organization as the organization is navigating and how we make decisions. And so it was such an important, it's part of how we operate. And so codifying that language and then translating that into the leadership behaviors and the development plans and how we calibrate folks and the decisions that we make to promote, we integrate into all of that, because we know that when we live those values and we're focused around what we're trying to accomplish, our strategic plan, we are successful. And so we want to hardwire it in, which we're doing now. But it started with, being authentic and just, okay, who are we really? And hearing from the people who would really tell you and really know who you are.
And that takes a lot of intestinal fortitude. I was having a conversation with someone earlier who said that, and I've had this happen, I can't tell you how many times, where we've done a survey, we've gotten feedback from employees, executive team sees it, and they just get mad because they're like, oh, that hurts my feelings, or, whatever. They don't say that, obviously, but, you mentioned the corporate employees saying thank you for the feedback, even when it was negative. And so that's something that's also sounds like it's part of your values as well. We've talked a lot about human-centric design, but why is that so important? You talked about, I love the Humanifesto, by the way. Why is that so important? You're a restaurant company.
Yeah, we are a restaurant company. So people serve people and people make food for other people. And so, I think human beings are a huge part of an organization, and the relationship that human beings have with the organization drives the performance of the company. And I think our leadership team and our CEO really understand and see it they know it intellectually and philosophically, but they also see it in the business results. It's clear. And it's clear the difference that we see in those business results when discretionary effort is unleashed. We were under incredible duress, and people were under incredible duress, and they stepped up. People took on more and took on more projects and more things, and were, supporting each other 24 hours, a day, half the time. And so we really understand and value that. And understand that there's also a scientific side to that, and understanding human beings and how do you affect behavior, and how do you help human beings to be successful and set them up for the best success. It's not just what you tell people or try and force or do. It's understanding that human beings operate your organization in every way and they touch in every way. And so knowing and understanding how do you set them up for success at every part of that is, we just see tremendous business results from doing so.
And so just to share with the group, some of the things that we're working on is how do we help them be that full authentic self in a way that helps them build science-backed resiliency skills, because that's the leadership skills that we need for this historical moment as we're facing the stresses that we mentioned, but also as we get to the last thing, which is leaning forward, as opposed to holding on to the past and hoping we just go back to how we were. So some of the work that we're doing is, teaching them, how do I manage stress? How do I manage my internal workings as a human? And how do I understand how my brain responds with emotions and thoughts, and how I can adjust my thinking to with scientifically proven methodologies based on neuroscience and cognitive behavior theory to lead differently. And so you talked a little bit about some of the pivots you guys are making from an innovation point of view, but you've also, you and I have talked about how, you know, look at the workforce and how we have to innovate in our working models, right? We can't just hope everything goes back to how it was. We're into year 3. This is how we're going to operate. And so that looking forward and seeing this as an opportunity versus trying to recreate the past is definitely something that's different about Smokey Bones. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys are approaching that and as you move ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we agree wholeheartedly. In fact, James and I are working on some plans as we speak, and thinking a lot about how do we facilitate that change with our teams and help them to wrap their mind around, you know, certain things. And so, you know, I mean, I think that to your point earlier is part of resiliency. We know that being agile and continuously evolving, and coming to acceptance of things and, you know, accepting reality and, you know, forging ahead. It's part of our DNA. It's we have this drive for results. And so for us, like, if drive for results, we're a winning team that delivers. That's how we define it. So like, we want to win. We're not going to win if we're stuck in some loop, you know, about the past. That's unhealthy, toxic thinking. We have to be focused on how we're going to win, and we're going to adjust, change, move, agile, figure it out, you know, we're going to do what we need to do to win in accordance with our value, you know, knowing those guardrails and how we approach that. So I think that's what drives our continuous improvement. We're all, you know, we have to temper it sometimes and help us, because you know, the danger is burning out. So we have to be like, hey, let's all chill for a moment, you know, because we're just like, let's go. So, but I think that's what drives our forward thinking.
Yeah. And the other thing, just to kind of also share with the group that we're doing that's a little more innovative, is how we're funding this work. So we are helping Rachael get funding for all of the training through training grants in the states that they will fund for her industry and the topics that we're training. So that will ultimately fund most, if not all, of this work. So that's another type of innovation that we've been able to implement, taking advantage of those resources and funding opportunities. So just to kind of wrap us up and kind of move to questions, I have a page dedicated to socially conscious organizations, and it has data on the specific demands that are happening in those industries. There's also a tab on my website called Make the Case that talks about the cost of not investing in the emotional well-being of the teams. And then there's overviews of our program in case you want to check it out, and a link to our podcast. And so I guess with that, I will open up for questions.
So feel free to speak your question or type it into the chat, and Rachael or Allessandria will try to answer it for you.
So this is Bob Scoville. Thank you both for being here. We're just delighted to have you here with our community. Rachael, I learn, and I feel like folks that I work with learn well from hard knocks, you know, from mistakes and from things that don't go so well. Listening to your story, it sounds like so much has gone well, and certainly you went through a lot of crisis and challenge to get there. I wonder if, you know, there's anything specific, like a story you might tell about, like, I'm particularly curious about how you got your you talked about being an authentic and open leadership team, and that's where a lot of this started. And yet it sounds like you are relatively new as a leadership team, perhaps to one another, as well as to the organization. That doesn't come about by accident. And so just kind of curious how that emerged and how you have worked on it over time, because it usually takes dedicated effort over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we were a very, very new team and still forming relationships and trying to figure out our way, and not wanting to mess up and faced with this tremendous, tremendous crisis. I think, to answer your question, I think part of it is the approach of the CEO, and his level of empathy is high. And so, and his emotional intelligence is very high. And so when there were situations or, issues, his response always starts with compassion. And so I think that's why I say starting with role modeling that, it starts with that. And then I think the other thing was, we had a lot of just with the leadership team, a lot of open conversation about how people were feeling, about how they were feeling, about how scared we all were. I did a lot of education around trauma with the leadership team and the impact of trauma to the brain, to behavior, to how people respond. So we were constantly talking about, okay, how do we want to communicate this? Because there's a lot that goes wrong and a lot of challenges with flipping your business model around and IT. Oh, by the way, we did like this huge, IT upgrade and new systems and all sorts of stuff. And so just teaching people and the executive team, we had a lot of kind of team discussions, and then I did a lot of individual coaching and conversation, and walking people through how to handle that level of emotion, how to handle that successfully, how to help somebody kind of bring their lizard brain down, and how to respond. And so I think that's and we role modeled that then, and we role modeled that live on town halls with people every week, and we answered the tough questions. And so then our directors saw that, and our general managers and our managers saw that. So when they had employees coming to them screaming about, whatever was going on, whether it be riots or protests, or whether it be the latest, news about, COVID and some regulation and what was going on, it taught our managers. And then we actually started to talk to them about it, how to respond as well. And then people started to figure out that, holy cow, that works. Oh my gosh, wait a minute. This person who was just like, I didn't even recognize who this person was. I helped them calm down and like, we're cool. Like, and not only are we cool, we're like closer together because now we've gone through this. So that's, I think, how we navigate that and how we did as an executive team. I mean, crisis can bring people, it can cause a lot of dissension, but it can bring people together, and never let a good crisis go to waste. At what moment?
We have a question.
Yeah.
From Miranda. Rachel, at what moment during your cultural transformation did you recognize you were on the right track?
I don't know if there was a moment. I think there's like moments where there are wins. And when I saw how the company was responding and how we were performing, and the clear connection of the behavior and the motivation of the team to that performance, that's when I thought, okay, we're on the right track. We're moving in the right direction. We're accomplishing what we want to accomplish in the way that we want to accomplish it.
Great. And we have another question from Gretchen. What types of tools did you teach to reduce stress in the moment?
Yeah, several. Honestly, we did a lot of Zoom meetings in our town halls. We teach certain mindfulness strategies So we would use a lot of articles. We would use YouTube videos, guided meditation videos. We would use, I mean, just stuff that, I mean, stuff my therapist would send or would be talking to me through. I'd be like, ooh, we're going to use this. So all, you know, the emotions wheel, all of those kinds of things we used for education. And then at a certain point, we were actually having like weekly, like, hey, you want to come on? I'm going to be meditating at this moment, you know, for the next 30 minutes every week or every other week. If you want to come on, you're more than welcome to do it. And so we did some of that structured stuff. And then we just talked about, you know, we just talked about it openly. I talked about my own challenges openly, and showed that vulnerability. And I think that's part of what gives people the courage then to kind of work on themselves too. So I didn't have Allessandria at that time with her amazing program to use. So it would have been different if that was, you know, at that time.
Well, now you're even better, right? So
Exactly.
that's great. I don't see any further questions in the chat. I can tell you that, you know, I work in a small 5-person company, and I think every company had to adapt during COVID in ways to try to address that elephant in the room of the stress that people were under. And you know, one thing that we tried was we would do a morning meeting it was scheduled for a half an hour, but some days it was 5 minutes and other days it would run for 45 minutes. And there was no agenda. We just, you know, sometimes we talked about the weather. Sometimes we talked about work that had to get done that day. Other times we talked about something we did that over the weekend or something, or complaining about how COVID was never ending or something. But, you know, I never got direct feedback from anybody on whether they loved it or not, but it seemed to be working. And nobody said, you know, I don't want to do this anymore. I mean, we all had those weeks where I'm really busy. I can only stay for 5 minutes and someone would run, but it was pretty consistent. And we found that I think it helped to keep us together at a time that we felt like we were all being pulled apart.
Absolutely. That's social support and companies creating the spaces, which you can do virtually. And actually, we found virtually in some instances, you can even become more connected and more personal because I'm in my personal space and my cat's jumping on my head and my 5-year-old's running in saying, I need a blah, 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 give me peanut butter, you know? So it creates opportunity to create connections as well. And that social support is a huge part of resiliency. I think there was a question in here around tracking progress and like what metrics do we use to track progress? And I'll just answer that real quick. There's a few. So one is very simply turnover. So we didn't, you know, turnover. Are we trending in the right direction? How do we trend against BLS? How do we trend against industry? And and how do we trend against ourselves? So turnover is a big one. And that being us reducing that, we actually during some of that time had record low turnover levels, which we did not anticipate actually at the time, given what was going on. The other thing we look at is Glassdoor ratings. We watch those. And that going up from 3.1 to, I haven't looked, not done, you know, we teeter between 3.8 and 3.9. But that is one of the measurements. Getting certified as a great place to work was one of the measurements. And then we have our own internal ones as well. So, you know, we do different pulse surveys and we have different touch points that we look at those metrics. But I think it's really important to use hard metrics and be translating that into the business results to make sure that it's all aligned synergistically.
We have one more question from Olivia. Did it take a while to convince your team to allow for such an open forum where managers and hourly employees could reach out to virtually everyone in the company? Were there any moments where it felt scary to have that forum?
It didn't take very long to convince management, but I didn't really ask their permission. It was kind of like, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm flipping this switch. So there wasn't a lot of discussion there, but there definitely were moments that were challenging because it was a forum that, you know, we actually at the time didn't even have the ability, it's internal, but we couldn't even delete the comments. And so certainly we had people who are, you know, you have frontline employees, you have managers who are in the throes of things, you know, coming online at, you know, midnight at times. And yeah, there were times that were scary because you didn't want to say the wrong thing. You didn't want to create a pylon, and you wanted to make sure that you were responding in a compassionate way. And so we navigated through that, and we did, I think, fairly well through that. And it created more trust in the organization as a result.
If I can add that's actually one of the things that you can teach people in building resiliency is how to manage those scary feelings, because we have them. And then, you know, what ends up making that more complicated is then we grapple with, but I shouldn't have them. And we get into these loops. So when we teach people the skills around resiliency, they know how to accept the situation as it is, and then know that they're going to do their best and treat themselves with the self-compassion that will help them navigate that a little bit more effectively.
Great. Well, I see that we're at the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of everyone's time that took time out of their evening to join us tonight. And this has been a great discussion. Allessandria and Rachel, thank you so much for your time. I did want to share with folks on the call, there are a number of great sponsors that have helped to support conscious capitalism here listed on the page. And of course, without their help and financial support, we wouldn't be able to, you know, bring programs like this and many others that we have planned for 2022. And we're just getting started with the programming for this year, including a gathering that's still being discussed a little bit about whether it's going to be in person or virtual for executives. So just stay tuned, check out our newsletter that comes out, or go to the website. Are there any final 60-second parting comments from each of you, our special guests tonight?
Go ahead, Rachel.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about, you know, very important topic, and I hope that there were some helpful insights.
Yes, and thank you for sharing your experience with us. I think it just helps to hear the realistic application of these concepts brought to life. So thank you.
Sure, and I'm going to be searching for the closest Smokey Bones in the Boston area.
There's several. There's one in Taunton.
All right, to check it out.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Yes, thank you all. Have a good night.